Behold, I finally got a new phone that's from this decade and even splurged on the nice model so I can take extremely high resolution cat pictures to bring you extremely high resolution cat PNGs. This is what your patron dollars go to. Aside from that, how y'all doing? You know what else is something that's pretty cool like cat PNGs? Spooky cowboy shooters. And I've got something that's fresh out of early access to show you. Blood West. Blood West is a game that I first made a video about when it launched in early access about a year and a half ago. It's a sneaky shooter, which many people have mentioned feels very Stalker-esque, and while I didn't even initially think that, I gotta admit as soon as people brought it up, I was like, oh yeah, I can totally see that, yeah. Especially with how some of the trinkets work in direct comparison to artifacts. In Blood West, you play as an undead cowboy of dubious moral background who is tasked by a Totem of Souls to cleanse various lands of their spooky presence. The spooky presence is far too much for you to initially tackle as one cowpoke who cannot die, and dying will have negative effects even if you come back from it. You're gonna have to use your stealth skills and your wits before you can get into the ripping and tearing on this one. But don't worry, you can definitely go loud once you've got the gear and the skills. One last thing before we get started on the gameplay. While I do recommend Blood West, if it sounds like your thing, what you're seeing here is almost entirely pre-release gameplay. Act 1 was recorded right as early access launched, Act 2 was right around when that launched, and for Act 3 I was given access to a special pre-release preview, and I'm embarrassed to say the reason this video didn't come out last week and having the starter guide be this week is because I forgot to ask the dev if there was an embargo on videos or stuff for it, and I didn't want to bother them a second time. That's my problem though, and we're here now, so I guess it's all good. So yeah, from the outset, Blood West is a sneaky shooter, especially during the first few hours of the game. Enemies can take you down in 3 or sometimes even 2 hits, with some enemies later on in the late game being able to one-shot you if you don't have very much HP, and they move fast enough to catch up with you unless you find a way to juke them. You need to get the drop on monsters if you want to stand a chance of surviving. That means getting enemies alone and getting them just inside the headshot range of your pistol. Depending on your weapon, sometimes a headshot will be just enough to take out a monster in one, sometimes it won't. It's gonna be a lot more forgiving in the first act, where enemies generally have a lower health pool, but later on you might find yourself having to completely change out your weapons and playstyle after realizing that your preferred weapon just doesn't cut it anymore among tougher enemies. You serve me well, lever action rifle, but it's just not enough for the big boys. If combat goes sour and you're not quite ready to try direct methods of violence, there are options. Well, yes, you can heal yourself, including in the middle of combat. Healing items do not automatically repopulate into your utility slots, and the one healing item that does stack, the bandages, isn't going to do a meaningful amount of health recovery until you found certain trinkets or put certain skill points into related abilities. Sure, if you want, you can fill all 3 slots with health potions, but that means you can't stop bleeding with bandages and you can't use throwables. The main thing you're gonna want to do, unless you found something a little more reliable, is to learn how to lose a group of bad guys and re-engage them later when they all don't have a bead on you. Now, when you do have something that packs a punch, out loud combat can get wild. Enemies still do enough damage to get you down in several hits, and your stamina is very limited. You're going to need to strategically zip around the map using any physical cover you can to buy enough time to cram more shells into your gun, and then blasting away the closest monster on your way to the next bit of cover. You can do long-range engagements too if you're real good with your aim, but I found a lot of my out loud fighting started with unloading whatever high-powered weapon I had to pick off the closest guys, and then switching to a shotgun once people were close. Remember, this is a Wild West game where magazine loading weapons aren't a thing. You gotta manually load each bullet into a gun. So if I did the tier list 2 weeks later than I had, Blood West would go into the borderline tier. It's got elements of an immersive sim, but I cannot stack boxes. You're given a ton of freedom in how you sneak around and kill enemies, but you cannot do the wild stuff that involves the use of object manipulation or special abilities. Well, there's some object manipulation, but not like you'd expect from, say, Deus Ex or Dishonored. The stuff you level into isn't so much getting fantastical abilities as it is getting stat upgrades. However, there are some things you can unlock, like fanning the revolvers. Most of the crazy stuff will come from the trinkets, which we'll talk about by themselves in a sec. There are the usual sim-ish tricks, like throwing rocks to distract enemies, or taking advantage of the chaos caused by an explosion to get the drop on a group, but don't expect to do anything really slick. On the note of kitchen sink design, a tenet of immersive sims where nearly anything the player can do is accounted for, while there aren't too many special lines to the effect of, "Oh, you already did that," or "Oh, hey, we weren't expecting you to be able to do this in the way you did, but perhaps we're pulling it off," There also isn't any gating off of quests by world states, which is to say that the key items for late game quests are in the world the second you spawn in. It is entirely possible to blunder into major areas of the game for the late game or find key items before you're even told you need to be looking for them. Part of the game is grabbing anything that isn't bolted down for resources or the money to buy resources, so it makes perfect sense that you'd be able to incidentally grab something vital to a ritual or an errand that someone hasn't asked you to do yet. There's three major ways to alter your stats of your character: leveling up and picking perks, trinkets, and sometimes special weapons that confer major stat changes, and flaws on your soul. Leveling up is straightforward enough, and the perks are nothing too crazy. It's basic stuff like, do you want more HP, or do you want to throw things farther? There's some pretty good foundational stuff in there, like getting monsters to drop more trinkets and gold, or getting more experience per kill with a bonus for headshots, which makes leveling into good stats and gear much easier. Which, if anything, these are less things that you might level into, but more speed bumps that you need to get before you start leveling into the good stuff. Every game has them. Where things can get really wild in your build are the trinkets. Trinkets do cool stuff. For instance, one of my bread and butter trinkets while exploring the swamp was a charm that teleports you back to the safe area if you're about to die, but might break each time you use it. Almost all the enemies in the game have a chance to drop some sort of minor trinket that helps you get started with making a build, so that you're not too set back while you scour the barren lands for the good stuff. Weapons can also have stats attached to them, like the sawed-off shotgun you'll be able to find early in the game, and each vendor will have at least one unique weapon you can buy off them, in addition to the tons of unique weapons that are hidden in each of the maps. Trinkets and weapons really do end up being your entire build, especially in the late game, like when you get the bow that gives you a heavy buff when you're in that weird toxic blood gas, which is a dangerous gamble at first, but then you find trinkets that make you immune to the stuff, so you can just lurk inside of it and do massive damage to everyone. Now, it's not all yeehaws and rootin' tootins when you're out playing Blood West, as there are negative buffs you can rack up along with all the good stuff. Every time you die, there's a chance that you'll get a flaw on your soul. They'll start out being relatively minor debuffs, but get pretty severe if you keep carelessly dying over and over again. It's nothing too fancy, but stuff that's gonna be a pain. Penalties to your health pool, getting less experience, being easier to detect when you're trying to sneak, and so on. You'll notice that I don't really have any of these problems in my gameplay, and that's because there are multiple ways out of getting flaws on your soul. The first one is to just wing it and play cautiously. Flaws on your soul aren't guaranteed every time you die, and I think your chances are better to not get one than getting one. Next is the most effective way of not stacking up soul flaws, which is to just use the coins you find to take up a trinket slot, and when you die, the coin will be expended to prevent a soul flaw. Or you can expend it beforehand by giving one to the Totem of Souls and asking for the luck of the cat, which does the same thing, but now you can run with 3 trinkets. Finally, if you've already racked up a bunch of soul flaws, you can spend a chunk of change to get a drink called the Purple Revival, and that removes them. Purple Revival also works to remove permanent trinkets too if you went for those. The worlds in Blood West are just as much of a character as the player is, arguably more so as the protagonist seems to have his background be intentionally nebulous, but more on that later. I'm going to take a sec to go over each of these 3 worlds without spoiling too much. The first place you'll be brought to are the barren lands, or just the desert as I sometimes call them. Once the protagonist accepts that he's no longer dead and meets the Totem of Souls, he's thrown into a wasteland that has something very evil in it. As the shaman explains, the lands are indeed cursed, and only he remains here to try and fix what's going on. Well, there's also Jim, but Jim doesn't have much going on. The Barren Lands was once a boomtown thanks to the rail line that went through the area and the fort the army was building nearby. Things changed, however, when the workers at the fort dug too deep and found something they shouldn't have, resulting in all manner of the dead being raised in a literal sense and the whole region being covered in perpetual night. Have fun dicking around in the gold mines. After the barren lands, you're taken to the swamp. I'm not sure if there is anything messed up with the swamp's day-night cycle because it's so foggy and dense you can't see the sun if you tried. Annabelle is here though, and it's nice because she actually has a backstory. Part of the reason why things are so bad in the swamp is because there was a protector of these lands, but he's gone missing, so it's up to you to figure out what happened to this place. The swamps are very dense when compared to the barren lands, and while there aren't nearly as many deep caves or tunnels for you to explore, the swamp is home to the Leech Cult, the Leech Gators, and much larger settlements, including a riverboat, which is a whole lot of fun to sneak through. Do not wake the creature before you are ready. Finally, there's the mountain. The mountain was supposed to be your escape, but things went sour, so you gotta improvise. Whatever evil was in the last two places also might be here, but then again it might be something else entirely owing to the giant chasm in the middle of the map that's spewing poison blood everywhere. Also, hell bears. When you first encounter one, you'll think it's a singular enemy that you have to defeat like a boss. Do not mess with the hell bears. The mountains have their own set of mines, a sawmill, and several towns you'll need to comb over for resources. The trees in the mountains make for good cover, but that's a two-way street. Also, never mind the hell bears, there's enemies in these woods that straight up turn invisible. Before we get into the story, let's talk about some other cool things in Blood West. For starters, the voice acting is great. No one is phoning it in, and the player character is voiced by Stephen Russell, who you might know as Garrett from the Thief series or like half of Arcane's games. Now I'm gonna be even more out of line than I was in that tier list and say that New Blood either needs to relinquish or have the Thief with Guns web domain redirect to Blood West. Because Blood West is Thief with Guns. It literally makes the little noise whenever the player character swipes something of value that he can pawn off later.
Let me take a closer look.
Also, your spooky cowboy Garrett. Another thing that I really love about Blood West is that the special guns are really cool. Sure, some of them are just simple reskins or recolors, but what you're really after are the cool effects the guns have and the little bits of lore attached to them. For instance, while I know it's growing in popularity in recent years, I was not expecting a Blood Meridian reference. But it certainly fits, especially considering that with the right ammo, it's capable of one-shotting some of the toughest enemies in the game. There's also the ridiculous stuff you get later, like the Buffalo gun shooting Nitro Express rounds, which can and will delete entire groups of enemies, or the 28-shot Super Revolver, which can take a literal minute to fully load if you don't have any stat bonuses to your reload speed. I guess that's a way the game is reminiscent of Stalker 2 and how half the fun is finding cool new guns and stuff that can vaporize an elephant. And finding guns brings me to arguably the best part of the game, the exploration. Blood West's worlds are way built out, with countless nooks and crannies to check out that are in no way related to any quest. They're just there for you to explore. I honest to goodness love that the worlds manage to be large and sprawling without being just an endless blah landscape that only exists so that the devs can hide 1,000 crafting ingredients in them. They're actual places that tell a story, with surprisingly few tactically posed skeletons, but instead by what kind of an area the place was. All the posed skeletons in the world aren't going to tell as much of a story as having an abandoned circus tent with a singular hellbear inside of it. Now let's talk about the story a bit more in depth. As we established earlier, we play as an unnamed undead of dubious moral background that is tasked by the Totem of Souls to destroy supernatural evils. We don't know why the Totem of Souls is asking us to remove these things from the land, and you know, he's kinda sketchy himself and won't really explain anything beyond what we absolutely need to know. We aren't even sure why it's us that got revived, or why the totem is willing to keep reviving us every time we wander into a dozen ghouls instead of just getting someone else. We just keep getting resurrected whenever the totem needs something of us. Okay, time for actual plot details. You know what to do if you don't want them. So we go through the process of weakening the barrier and confronting the evil in the barren lands. It's a big evil tree. But you don't have to fight it head on. You can sneak through the root network and quietly destroy it from within. The tree was allowed to grow after some workers at the fort dug up some cursed gold, which allowed the roots to propagate or something, which made it grow strong enough to blot out the sun. I think. The plot around the Barren Lands was a while ago. After the Barren Lands, we arrive in the swamp, where we're greeted by the totem and Annabelle, who's got some sort of affliction that looks like it needs tending. However, she also wants us to find an old preacher man and a child that got lost. The preacher man's kinda sketchy too, but we can buy some cool stuff off him. And Twen, the little girl that knows about the great evil in the swamps, is actually helpful and knows more about the area in general. The preacher has the same affliction as Annabelle, and there is a cure out there, but only one dose. I ended up giving the cure to Annabelle because she had a better inventory, and plus even the Totem of Souls thought the preacher was sketchy. After following some leads, we learned that we aren't the only totem and undead duo, and that another totem is bound to the tree above our safe zone. Talking to the other totem tells us about the evil to get us a lead on how to destroy it, but also awakens the big evil in the land. It's the Milk Walker. As the Milk Walker stomps around, we learn that while the other totem is effectively useless now in all practical senses, his chosen undead can help us defeat this thing. It turns out this undead was also a cowboy of dubious moral background, who, when the other totem lost its will to continue, the locals hacked his body apart to prevent him from coming back to life. We find the remaining pieces of him and our totem brings him back. Meet Cowboy Friend. He's just named as Undead in the credits, but I like Cowboy Friend better. Cowboy Friend knows what we need to weaken the Milk Walker, and once we get the stuff for him, we shoot the Milk Walker in its stupid head. The Totem of Souls is done with us for now, and we heed Cowboy Friend's warning about long-term association with entities like the totem and follow him the hell out of the swamp. Everything's cool until we take a tumble and Cowboy Friend has to do a little dark magic to put us back together again. This is bad. While Cowboy Friend can resurrect us, we need the Totem of Souls if we want a long-term solution. To make things worse, whatever is making ancient evils wake up in the barren lands and the swamps has also made some ancient evils wake up in the mountains. Cowboy Friend barely even recognizes this place and he's from here. We have to go into a deep chasm and gather a soul of the great undead creature to help build a new Totem of Souls, but in the meantime we're gonna help out this doctor fellow get some leads on where his friend is, and one of the monsters in the region is actually nice and just needs some help finding her skin. Do I need to? She technically isn't showing any skin, but I'm gonna censor this anyway. We get what we need and then scour the mountains for 4 statues to open up the path to the highest point in the mountain range to build a new Totem of Souls. So, somewhat unsurprising twist. The Totem of Souls is indeed the bad guy, and now that we've summoned it at a point where the fabric between the worlds is especially thin and there's plenty of biomass around in the form of graves inside of the mountain, it manifests a physical form. Turns out that the totem was using us to clear out its competition so that when the time is right, it and its allies will be able to take over this realm unopposed. Time to put this thing down. Of all the final encounters in this game, the Totem of Souls is by far the best one. I can excuse the previous ones for being a bit lackluster because the player might have leveled into stealth-centric skills, so they need things to be subvertible or beaten through hit-and-run tactics. But by the time you're facing the Totem of Souls, you're going to have a large collection of special weapons and trinkets, and you're going to be able to make a build that hits like a truck. It's a fight that shows even the sneakiest, stealthiest players that playing loud can be a hell of a lot of fun. Seriously, I had a fantastic time fighting this giant flesh demon thing using a shotgun once wielded by a large albino psychopath and a belt-fed super revolver. The game ends with a Pyrrhic victory. Yes, you kill the physical form of the Totem of Souls and have secured a free immortality for now, but it turns out that unlike Thanos, the Totem of Souls actually is inevitable. And while you pass the years, eventually the totem resumes its plans and lays waste to the world, ending with you returning to its side just as the totem said you would. Then we get a cool little music video with the credits. Final thoughts on Blood West. It's sick, cool, and pretty radical. Sneak around and let out a yeehaw as you squeeze the trigger and turn a zombie into wallpaper. Steal everything that isn't bolted down, and touch all of the cursed objects. Blood West is going to be on sale for the next week or so for $17.49, down from $25, and I totally recommend it if it wasn't clear already. That's going to do it for today. I want to thank you all for stopping by and hope you liked the video and give Blood West a try. If you want to help other people find this video and help me out in the process, there's always doing all those algorithm things. If you really want to help me out with making this channel a cool place with no sponsors and actual indie games instead of clout chasing, there's the Patreon I run over at patreon.com/charlatanwonder. Since it's the end of the year, I think I'll discount the yearly pledge rate as low as it'll go. So if you're feeling it, you can get a whole year of advanced access to videos, 4K unobstructed cat clips, your name in the credits, full recipes for the cooking segments, and probably some other stuff I'm forgetting about right now. If you're not into Patreon or recurring monthly support, I do have super thanks enabled for one-time tips on YouTube directly, and if you can't or won't do either of those, it's cool. I'll try to my best to earn your pledge someday. Now let's sign off. Remember that no matter what you do, be it filming skate videos, restoring old cars, dancing, or however you express yourself, what you do is not content. It is art. Content is a means to take all your skills, aspirations, and dreams and grind them up into a gray sludge whose only purpose is to make some line go up in a boardroom. Your art in no way deserves that. Your art is innately a reflection of you by the very nature of its creation, and you are in no way deserving of being ground up into content. So fight for your art. Fight for yourself by fighting against content. Stay saucy, everyone. An important decision is being made. Which box will the saucy boy choose after the Sam's Club run? The, what is this? The coffee box and the single serve variety pack have reigned supreme for a while, but we got some contenders here. Baking soda, more coffee, ranch. But Chonk is going for the peels. You gonna be a peels boy? Oh no, we're going to this box. Gotta feel them all out. Pick a winner. Are you the roastery? Hurry up and choose. We gotta throw the rest of these away. We can't just have like 20 boxes laying around the living room. Wobble, wobble, wobble. I'm gonna pet. Oh, I'm gonna get the pet. I'm gonna get the pet. Oh no, you're putting up a good defense. Hurry up and choose.